So good evening and welcome. This is our second Grand Zoom, and we are delighted to have Kevin Cook be our guest. Kevin is an author. He's the author of Tommy's Honor. It's a fantastic book that most of us who play Hickory consider it the Bible. It's the early game and the matches and the people, and it's phenomenal. And Kevin's going to give us an inside look at that. James Kaiser is our Region 5 director. He has prepared several questions to run by Kevin and make it a conversation. If you have the opportunity, we'll accept some questions from the group and jot them down, feed those. So we will get started with Kevin in just a few minutes. We like to take a couple minutes and do a kind of a quick commercial for the GHS. The updates, it's very important for our membership to continue and expand. We ask you to invite members and expand our base. That's how we are successful. Our membership directory will be finalized soon in the next 2 to 3 weeks time. So if you have those people that you've been meaning to invite or those members that you know have not rejoined, please give them a call, give them some encouragement so they will be part of the directory. So I'm looking very much forward to having the paper copy in my hand. It's nice to have the electronic, but it's also nice to have the paper copy. That will come with the summer edition, summer volume of the Golf. So we need to admit a few more people. Very good. Okay. Great. All right. So we're asking people to understand that supporting the GHS is building membership, financially supporting. We have any number of financial sponsors who are helping us with different aspects of the GHS convention and other things that we're working on. These dollars will help us be better and be able to do more things such as pay for social media, advertisements, etc. You can also support this by attending functions and using your benefits. My goodness, your benefits are really our terrific website. Everybody knows about the journal, but it's really the website that we're building. So help us build it bigger and better. We're looking forward to soon expanding the website to have subgroups by interest, not only collector, but group interests, the artists, etc., the writers, and have their own Zoom calls. So last year when COVID hit, it really hurt us to not be able to get together in person. And it took us about 6 months to figure out that we could start to learn how to get together using technology. So we're doing that. We're having board meetings and committee meetings using Zoom. They're going very well. We're also starting to have regional Zoom meetings, and very soon we'll have Zoom meetings by interest. So we now know, after Columbus, we recruited about 7 Grand Zoom speakers. So we're very excited, and we will be putting forth a schedule of Zoom calls, the Grand Zoom calls. And they're all people that you will really want to hear from. So I think those are all the commercials that I had for you. One more point, the GHS National Convention will be held in Pittsburgh this year in October. We're going to play golf the 30th of September at Latrobe Country Club, home of Arnold Palmer. We're excited about that. The group of what I call the Latrobe hosts will be enhancing the program. One of the locals has written a book, and he will be there. Chris Rodell has written the book Arnold Palmer, Homespun Stories of the King. He will be with us at the convention both promoting his book, and he will also, with the Latrobe host group, be telling stories about their interactions with Arnold Palmer over the years. So we have added, expanded the program, lengthened it for the convention. Everything about it is a little bigger and a little better. So please, October 1, 2, 3 will be in Monroeville, PA, and we'll be very delighted to have you all come. So if I can, I would like to introduce James Kaiser. James is our Region 5 regional director. He's been on board for a couple years now. He's a fireball. I'm going to ask James to say a little bit about his particular interest and what he brings to the GHS, because he has a very technology related job that we're hoping to capitalize on. And then James will bring on the speaker and get us going. James, take it away.
Okay. First of all, Bern, if you could probably mute everybody's microphones except for myself and Kevin, that would help with probably sound quality.
Very good. I'll work on that.
So if you can get that, but make sure you don't mute me and Kevin. So anyway, I just wanted, I'm just humbled actually that Kevin responded with such graciousness for doing something like this. I mean, I don't know how much you all know about me, but I'm a diehard golfer. And since I've gotten involved in Hickory, growing up on a Hickory course myself, an 1895 course here in Louisville, Kentucky called Cherokee, I always wondered why that course was so quirky and goofy, actually, to be honest with you. And I basically found out why. It's because of Hickory. And I started playing in the National Hickory Championship down at Oakhurst in 2005. And since then, I've been enamored with the game, and I've learned all about Tom Morris and Tom Morris Jr. and through reading books like Tommy's Honor, and since I've been involved in the game of golf in a lot of different capacities, I was actually one of the initial people that helped found the Almost Golf Ball. And if you don't know what the Almost Golf Ball is, you're probably in the majority, because the majority of people still don't know what it is, but it's about 60 million balls they've sold. All the first tee programs use it, but it's basically a synthetic wine cork ball from the synthetic wine cork industry. So I think, I'm going to tie that into something here in a second, but I thought that was unusual because Tom Morris himself used to play a game called Silly Bodkins, and they used champagne corks, and they'd put nails in it, and they'd play through the streets of St. Andrews. So not only was Tom Morris, a visionary, but he actually invented the off-course ball. That's something that we rediscovered again 150 years later. I think that's fascinating. Well, now I've progressed. I'm a project manager for something that'll blow your mind. If you check out my LinkedIn page, you can see the videos, but we're going to have a glow-in-the-dark range. So we'll have glow-in-the-dark targets. We're going to have lasers. We're going to have glow-in-the-dark balls.
Oh,
you know what? In Tommy's honor, in the book, there was two guys 150 years ago that actually killed themselves doing this, but they worked with phosphorus. And so they had glow-in-the-dark phosphorus golf back in 1860. Now that's just crazy. Now they died working with phosphorus because it's a dangerous material. I know one of the guys died. And I just think that's fascinating. But one other thing I want to touch on is Tom Morris has got to be the greatest person ever for our sport. Bigger than Tiger, bigger than anything. Because I'll tell you why. If there was no Tom Morris ever, we probably wouldn't be on this Zoom call right now. I mean, Tom Morris, just a brief history. He basically put the Gutty Percha ball on the map, right? He had, well, who are these architects? C.B. McDonald, Donald Ross, A.W. Tillinghast, that all worked for him. Alistair McKenzie attributes everything to him and pays total tribute to him. So some of the greatest architects, some of the greatest golf courses in the world are developed by Tom Morris. He won 4 British Opens. His son won 4 British Opens. He played in 36 or 38 British Opens in a row. The guy's a phenomenon. And if I ever, you always hear about what 4 people would you play with? I would definitely have Tom Morris in my foursome if I could ever play with Tom Morris. But with that said, there's this cool guy named Kevin Cook. So Kevin Cook comes along, and let me give you some things here about Kevin. I don't know how many of you all, I'm sure everybody on this call, Flip Wilson. You all heard of Flip Wilson? Geraldine, The Devil Made Me Do It? Kevin Cook wrote a book about Flip Wilson. Kevin Cook wrote a book about Titanic Thompson, who was a notorious gangster. Kevin Cook wrote Last Headbangers, 1970 NFL book. He wrote Burning Blue, which is about Christina McAuliffe and the disaster. Kevin Cook wrote about 10 innings at Wrigley. Kevin wrote about called Drive. It's it's about the future of golf and teen sensations and overbearing parents for their kids. He wrote about Kitty Genovese. It's a murder mystery. He wrote The Dad Report, which is a baseball family book. He wrote Electric October, 1947 World Series game between the Yankees and Dodgers. Joe DiMaggio, we've all heard of him. And so he's written some really cool books, and he has just a unique gift of projecting things that make it really interesting and cool and fun. And I just thoroughly enjoyed the book. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. And I just want to get in and welcome Kevin Cook to our Zoom call. Kevin?
James, thank you so much. That was a fine introduction. I appreciate Bern's introduction as well. I'm a big supporter of the GHS, and I think the attention to history means so much. I think golfers ought to know why we play 18 holes and why the hole is the size that it is, which I've always felt it's not quite big enough. And as much as I prize my work on and my time working on those other books, Tommy's Honor was the first book. Tommy's Honor is still special to me, and I'm always delighted to talk about Tom Morris. I think you're right. I think that he is the greatest innovator in the history of the game. The creating the game. He and Tommy Morris, his son, who really invented the role of the touring pro. The game would be unrecognizable without the Morrises.
Well, yeah, we have a whole bunch of questions for you that I know we prefaced you on, but obviously with all these books about, obviously you're interested in space and interested in baseball and everything. What's your background in golf, and how did you get started in the game?
Well, I got started when I was 11. My mother was the golfer in the family. She took me to the local course. And I vividly remember the first hole that I got to play a 110-yard par 3 elevated tee, and was thrilled to take my first one. I hit driver. I was 11 years old, like 11 or 12. And somehow the ball wound up 2 feet from the hole. It clinks down and bounces up. And I set the pattern for the rest of my golfing life by missing the putt.
So you were hooked.
Yeah, that was definitely it. And grew up playing on the first course that Pete and Alice Dye designed, Heather Hills in Indianapolis. Pete Dye, of course, another great architect who was tremendously influenced by Tom Morris. All those railroad ties that I've bounced several balls of. We've got the PGA Championship coming up at the Ocean Course. I hit one there that bounced off a railroad tie onto the back of an alligator. That was 2 steps of separation from Tom Morris right there. So I've cared about the game for a long time. Always wanted to play a lot better, but finally reached a point where it's fun to get out and play, whether the ball goes in a hole or not.
So what brought your interest? I mean, you're a history buff, right? So what brought you
Sure.
to this whole Tom Morris thing? I mean, at what point in your life did you hear about Tom Morris and all this? And
Well, just as a player, you gather a little bit of information about Tom and have some idea who he was. But my first pilgrimage to St. Andrews was in 1986. My wife, who had been to the UK, took me over there for my 30th birthday. And in those days, you could just show up on the tee at the old course if you're there at dawn and get out and play. It cost 20 pounds to play. I had the great good fortune to play with 3 locals named Peter, and John, who guided me. As you all who have played links golf know, if you're playing a course for the first time, you have no idea where to aim the ball. They helped me with that. They gave me a benediction when I went down into the hell bunker, which I certainly needed. And at one point, since I tend to take a fairly wild swing at the ball, they say, oh, he swings like Tommy Morris. And I thought they meant old Tom. I knew Tom Morris. I did not know anything about Tommy Morris. They told me a little bit about Tommy, the great legend that he died of a broken heart, which to some degree is still believable. I think it had something to do with Tommy's end. Um, but I got more and more interested in both Scottish golf and in the story of the Morrises. And again, it was such a great privilege to play with three locals on the old course the first time out. I remember hitting a basically a grounder off the tee at one point, and Peter and John said, "Oh, it's a scolded cat," which is pretty descriptive. It moves along the ground like a cat running away. And I said, well, where I come from, we call that a worm burner. And that was the funniest thing that they had ever heard, a worm burner. I wound up picking up information, keeping files over the years. And then at one point I was running Golf Magazine, and then I was no longer running Golf Magazine. And it seemed like a good time to write that book.
So obviously, now you know about Tom Morris and Tom Morris Jr. from playing at St. Andrews, right? And obviously, you probably at that point maybe started thinking about a book, and so you obviously probably look. I'm just drawing lines here and being hypothetical. I don't know. I'm just
that's all right so far.
So you basically probably looked at other people's books that knew something about Tom Morris. So when you decided to write a book and you knew about these other books, what did you expect to do differently than what they did, and what were you after?
Well, there had not been a biography of Tom since the 19th century, since the early 20th century, right after he died. There was good newspaper material, but my goal was to understand these men as the strivers that they were, and not as stained glass figures. I think we tend to look back on well-known people of the past and think that they really knew what was coming, and they were like Madame Tussauds figures. But these were tough men who were fighting to make something of this game that was still being created at the time and in its modern form. It goes back centuries, but the modern game was really beginning in St. Andrews in the mid-19th century. I wound up finding great help. I mean, I began at the USGA library in Far Hills, where there's a great deal of information, but it's limited. One needs to go back. And I spent a good deal of time in St. Andrews, where's the wonderful St. Andrews University Library, which I basically destroyed a couple of microfiche machines. You're reading shot by shot accounts, because this was the beginning of what the Times of London called golfomania, of matches that were being played in 1868, 1869, even before the Open began in 1860. There were first-person accounts. There was a lot of great information. There's a wonderful library called the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, found out an enormous amount of information that did not appear in any books. And that's what fascinated me the most. Joe Pinnington, who's the historian at Hoylake at Royal Liverpool, gave me the key to their library. I spent a good deal of time in the archives at Prestwick, which was forgotten for a long time as really the birthplace of the Open. And there's a remarkable story, of course, that's in the book about how Prestwick relinquished control of the Open Championship for the cost of a certain claret jug. They wanted to split the cost of the claret jug with a couple of other clubs. That's how the Rota began, and that's how St. Andrews and the R&A began their path to where we are today. And every turn became fascinating. And I think anyone who plays Hickory golf can have a sense of just how difficult the game was that they were playing at that time. And what a remarkable story it was that the modern professional game was beginning at that time. And these were the men who did it.
So you said you found a lot of surprises. The Glasgow, you referenced the Glasgow archives as one of your best surprises. And the research you were doing, was that the biggest surprise you found, or what was the biggest surprise you found in the research that you uncovered?
I think probably the biggest, in terms of importance to me, was the realization that the role of touring professional was invented by Tommy Morris. Before him, his dad used to play Willie Park. They played challenge matches. You'd play the fellow from the other town. Willie Park used to put ads in the paper. Tom Morris is afraid to play me. They were like Ali and Frazier in their day. But they played single matches. Sometimes you play foursomes with your partner, go play the champions of the next town over. Tommy Morris, that wasn't good enough for him. Tommy Morris wanted to be paid to play for his talents. He didn't want to play and win a match and then get a little percentage of what the gentleman golfers who did all the betting had won when he won. Tommy wanted to do it himself, and he joined his friend along with Davy Strath. They went on the road, and if the next town down, if the next town in England, if Perth in Scotland, if Musselburgh, if Dundee didn't have a couple of players, if Aberdeen didn't have somebody to play them, they play each other. They went on tour as golfers, making it really, for the first time, a big spectator sport. For the first time, outshining the amateur golfers. At the beginning of the Open was just a sideshow to the club championship at Prestwick, seen as much less important. It was Tommy Morris in his very short career that established, that came up with the idea of the touring professional. And that's why I think every Sunday morning, every tour pro ought to tip his cap to Tommy Morris, but they haven't listened to me on that one yet.
I don't think they really even realize who he is. I mean, the more and more people I talk to, they don't even know who Tom Morris or Tommy, especially don't know who Tommy Morris Jr. is. It's amazing.
That's one reason that the Golf Heritage Society does important work. I think when you look at baseball, people ask baseball fans who Jackie Robinson was. They'll tell you they know who Babe Ruth was. They can tell you about the Cincinnati Red Stockings of 1867. I'm very surprised that golfers, a lot of golfers, don't have much more interest in the history of the game, in why we play 18 holes, in why the hole is 4 1/4 inches across. And another, you asked about surprises. It was fascinating to be in that Mitchell Library in Glasgow, reading an account of the fateful match at North Berwick that led to heartbreak for Tom and especially for Tommy. When the crowd got so raucous that the fellow who was running the event had to send a couple of men down to the bay, bring me some rope, bring me back some rope, the rope that was used to moor ships in the harbor to hold back this boisterous crowd. And I'm looking at, oh, this is the first gallery rope. And the delight of finding things like that was really one of the highlights of a good deal of time researching this book.
So all of this gave you a different perspective, obviously, from when you entered into the thing and you did all this research and you found this wealth of goodness in places like Glasgow. That sounds like one of the best places you found for stuff that was nobody else was finding. So did this change your perspective of how the game started and the impact that Tom and Tom Jr. had on it?
It did. It made me admire them. It reminds you of that their lives were going on off the course, on and off the course. I was very moved and struck by the fact that there was this heartbreaking family story and a remarkable romance between Tommy Morris and Margaret Drinnan, which is entirely historical. These things really happened, and I was actually surprised that there had not been a book about Tommy Morris and his family, his father, his relationship with his father. Tom was, like any athlete whose father, the father is a fine player, then the son comes along and surpasses him. Well, one feels pride, but one feels a little competitive too. And they were definitely that way. Tommy teased his father. One thing Tommy said to his father was, "You'd be a fine putter, father, if the hole were always a yard closer."
That's right.
And the idea that
I tell that to Bern all the time.
Yes, for reasons that were as dramatic as any movie I'd ever seen. Tommy races back after there are no trains to St. Andrews to the tragedy that ended his life. I think it was one of the most moving and interesting sports stories I could imagine, and I couldn't wait to have a chance to tell it.
So the people that were in the know of Tom Morris Jr., like St. Andrews Golf Club and Prestwick, and especially the people in the United Kingdom, that would have a whole different appreciation for the Morris family. What did you get any feedback from those people about, after you wrote the book, of what they felt about your work?
Well, the folks at Prestwick were very pleased. They felt forgotten and still do to some degree. You can't hold the Open at Prestwick because there isn't enough parking. I mean, the course couldn't in the area couldn't really accommodate a major championship today. But it is the birthplace of the Open. Still a fascinating layout. Opened with a hole that was well over 500 yards in the 1860s, and numerous just what we would think of as crazy holes, but remarkable holes there. The Royal and Ancient was very leery of me from the start. And I do have friends there and spent time in there, but the Royal and Ancient can be a bit starchy. The greatest resource of them all for me was a man named Donald Malcolm, Doc Malcolm, who is a professor in St. Andrews, a historian of golf himself. And as a great academic, he exemplified to me both intellect and generosity. He was working on a book called Tom Morris, Colossus of Golf, that came out about a year after Tommy's Honor came out, also won the USGA's Book of the Year award. I was fascinated by the story of Tommy and Margaret. Nobody knew anything about Margaret really, but Doc Malcolm had researched all of the census records, which are very fine in Scotland, and learned the full story of Margaret Drinnen, which he was going to tell in a chapter of the book, The Colossus of Golf. And he shared with me, with a guy who was going to write a book and bring it out before his own book comes out. It was one of the greatest examples of the idea that some academics I admire have, that information should be free. We became great friends. We wound up trading houses. He and his wife, Ruth, who is a wonderful artist in Scotland, shown in the National Gallery. They would come to New York City. I'd like to spend some time in New York City, and they'd stay in our apartment while we went to St. Andrews and stayed in their house and looked after their cat, and they looked after our cat. We became great friends. Another very helpful source there, well, two others, David Joy, whom some of you may have seen as Tom Morris. David Joy is a great character. He can go into Tom Morris and channel his voice in various brogues depending on his audience. If the American audience, he's going to make it a little less thick. Scottish audience, some Americans would barely understand it. And also David Hamilton, who is a fine scholar of Scottish golf history. And it was funny, being an American, I got there, I expected David Hamilton and David Malcolm to be rivals. There it is. And they're great friends. David Hamilton gave me a tie to wear inside the Royal and Ancient. You can imagine the folks at the Royal and Ancient seeing me on the doorstep without a tie. David Hamilton went and got me one, and I did get to look at the championship belt that Tommy won.
So since you mentioned David Joy, he did the Scrapbook of Old Tom Morris, and those of you that might not know who he is, but there's a whole scrapbook that he put together for himself that I guess one of the royal family found out how cool it was and put it into publication. But I would encourage anybody that doesn't have a copy of the snapshot, what's it called? The Scrapbook of Old Tom Morris by David Joy, because this book is freaking awesome. So
it's remarkable. And those are, you know, it was interesting to run across some of the originals of some of those clippings during my research. It's a terrific book too. That's
awesome. So obviously you don't feel that the history of golf, especially Tom Morris and the Morris family, has gotten the appreciation they deserve. This might catch you off guard, but do you have any suggestions? Like maybe maybe at the Open, they should all have to wear beards for the first day or something.
You could
I
wear
don't know.
lumberjack coat. You know, you could
Yeah,
wear
wear lumberjack.
coats as
Right.
the gentleman of the Prestwick at Prestwick Golf Club felt that the scruffy caddies who participated in the first Open Championship were going to just look terrible and unpresentable. So they gave them matching lumberjack jackets. If you see photos, there's a well-known photo of Old Tom putting before the very first Open Championship in one of those lumberjack jackets. I do feel like there's a retro thing that I think there's been so much talk for the last 20 years and more about how can courses defend themselves against the length of today's tour pros. You know, I'm a Bryson fan. I love to see him swing. But one of the ideas that's been floated was, well, maybe Woods should be wood. Maybe the Woods, the driver, should have to have a wooden head. And I think that would be a good idea. That would be a great way to honor the game's history. And I would like to see the person who could talk TaylorMade and Callaway and Titleist into going along with something like that.
Well, you know, just a side note there, I used to work for Hilrick and Bradsby, and they're famous for the Louisville Slugger
Ash.
baseball bat,
A
as
lot
well
of
as
ash.
their persimmon woods. And they used to make a lot of woods for like Ben Hogan Company and a lot of companies. They made the wood heads and then they'd send them to finish. And they gambled and bet that they would be able to outlaw the metal heads when they started coming out. And they lost that gamble because they were able to do that in Major League Baseball and keep those bats wood.
That's right.
But they couldn't do that in golf, so they failed. So I think the horse is out of the thing. So what young players or any player, what do you see any modern day type of Tom Morrises out there out in the world?
Which old or young? I mean, old.
How about old and young?
I think old is Jim Furyk, a guy who plays position, a guy who doesn't hit the ball very far. Old Tom would hit the ball from place to place, and he felt that was the role that a golfer should. He was a very religious man. He thought that humility is something that a golfer should have, and he tried to instill it in his course design. It's also worth knowing that when Old Tom was young, the courses were so narrow, the fairways were so narrow with the winds that we tend to call gorse all over the place, that you needed to play that way. One of his innovations was to cut an awful lot of that back to make the game a little bit more freewheeling, which happened to suit Tommy's style. Tommy is a bomber. Tommy was a very fine, very, very aggressive putter, but swung hard. As all of you Hickory players know, there's certainly a limit to how hard you can swing the club. So it was quite rhythmic, but for those days, he took a furious lick at the ball. His hat would sometimes fly off during his swing. So Tommy was very much he was the Tiger of his day. The first fan favorite in golf, the one who really made it a spectator sport. And I think in the way that Tiger popularized the game when he first appeared on the scene, there hadn't been anything like that since Tommy Morris came on the scene. Wow.
So Tiger and Jim Furyk. I never would have expected you to say Jim Furyk. So were you pleased with how the movie turned out? I mean, was it? Let me back up, because you were talking about Tommy Morris and how ferocious he could swing, and I know somebody wanted to ask this question, but did the movie take liberty, like when he hit that shot and it backs up? Do you think he could really back it up like that, or was that liberty?
No, the short answer to that is no. Tommy, that was a dramatization of the fact that Tommy invented using the very lofted rut iron, a club that was made to pick a ball out of a cart rut, and realized that if you hit it from the fairway, you can make the ball stop when it comes down like a snowflake and it stops on the green. And as I say in the book, he invented backswing. Not backswing, everybody had a backswing. He invented backspin. And I think to dramatize that, Jason Connery, whom I believe did a tremendous, beautiful, soulful job on the movie, emphasize that by making the ball spin back. Another thing that happens in the movie that did not happen either in the book or in real life is when Tommy busts into the RNA. He wouldn't have done that. They would have taken his dad out and shot him. But in effect, that is what Tommy did, because Tommy took the game away from the gentleman and made it a game for the professionals. So we don't have 20 years. The movie can't last 20 years. The movie can't even last 3 years. That has to be encapsulated in a movie. As the lead writer of the movie, Pamela Marin, who is my wife and was the prime driver of the film, which is the reason, she is the reason that the movie was chosen as Best Picture by the Scottish BAFTA of that year. You have to boil the truth down into something that can play in a scene in a movie. So I think that was very characteristic of Tommy. In the movie, he bursts into the RNA and tells the gentleman that they're going to have to give him the money first before he plays. That's in effect what he did over history. And I think that's a liberty that's justified.
Okay. So you were pleased with how the movie turned out? Were there anything that you weren't pleased about?
I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's very, very fine. I'm not sure there is a perfect film. I think Jason did a magnificent, heartfelt job and a wonderful technical job directing the film. He did a great job casting the film. Peter Mullen is an icon in Scotland and incarnates Tom without imitating anybody. I think Jack Lowden is going to be a terrific star, and he's as handsome, as charismatic as Tommy Morris. Ophelia Lovibond, who isn't Scottish, sounds wonderfully Scottish in the film and was tremendous. Therese Bradley, who plays Nancy, it was a great privilege to see Sam Neill. There's a story behind that. We heard, oh, Sam Neill might want to be in the movie. We're going to need a scene for Sam Neill. So the last scene that was ever written for the screenplay was the scene between him when he tells Tommy, what are you doing coming to my home, young man? One is the character, if Sam is going to play Captain Boothby, then Captain Boothby needs a good scene with Tommy, and we were thrilled to write one.
I'm just glad there were no T-Rexes in the movie. That's
right. He would have been the one to go after them.
So let me ask you something, and this would probably be just your subjective opinion. I played over in Scotland a little bit, and I've noticed that the fairways run a lot, and honestly, the fairways over there, if Oakhurst, where the place we play the National Hickory Championship, had greens like those fairways, we would probably all score better, because those fairways are very puttable. Do you think that the greens back then were more styled after the way their fairways are today, or do you think they were shorter than that?
I maybe a little bit shorter, but I think it's a good comparison that when we think of a well-trimmed fairway, that's pretty much what they were putting on. They had to hit the ball pretty hard. I mean, if you're watching grainy film of Nicklaus and Palmer and Player, even 100 years after Tom and Tommy played, the ball seems to stop so quickly, doesn't it? It stopped even more quickly when Tom and Tommy and Willie Park and Davy Strath and the others were playing. I think it's remarkable that they scored as well as they did. Another thing that I ran across in the archives at Prestwick were good descriptions of the first recorded ace, which was struck, of course, by Tommy Morris in the Open Championship. It's fascinating to think of how difficult the game was at that time, and I don't think anybody can understand that in the way any better than Hickory player can.
Right.
For the little featurette they filmed about the making of Tommy's Honor, the movie, Jordan Spieth came and he hit some hickories. The first one he swung wasn't in the featurette because he went dead right and was like, I once saw Mark Calcavecchia shank a ball on the driving range. I mean, it was close to that, and that's how hard it is for one of the best golfers on earth to swing with a Hickory club and find that atom-sized sweet spot.
So you get me to my last question before we're going to open this up to questions. But we're talking a lot about hickories and everything. Have you ever played hickory golf? And if so, what's your experience with hickory golf?
Once. I have always wanted to play in the Hickory Championship and be one of the last place missed the cut players. But I did play in Fife in Scotland one time and lost. Well, I think they were able to pay for their maintenance of the course for several months on the number of balls that I lost in the rough that day, but had a fabulous time. And it's so, as both Jack Loudon and Peter Mullen said afterward, because they're swinging hickories in the film. It's such a great pleasure when you hit one. I mean, that's true with any kind of golf, but even more so, I think, in hickory, because it's so rare. It's so pleasurable. It's such a charge when you hit one just right and off it goes. I mean, we can talk some about their swings, which I think were very, very appropriate to the time. We were very lucky, the filmmakers, to get Jim Farmer, the emeritus professional at the RNA, to be the swing coach for both of the actors. The only other story about that I'll tell you is that Jack Loudon, when Jason was interviewing him to see if he might play Tommy Morris, said, "Well, have you played any golf?" "Oh, yeah. Oh, of course. Grew up playing the game," when he'd never swung a club in his life. Because if you're an actor and they ask you if you can break dance or ride a horse, you say yes.
That's right.
He wound up being a good study for Jim Farmer, and that watching them swing is for me, one of the pleasures of the film.
Yeah, because they don't really have any pictures of Tommy Morris Jr. at the top of his backswing. There is a picture, though, of his brother, JOF, and he wore the bonnet too. And I guess they had very similar with the big bent left arm and wrapped around your head like John Daly.
The hammer grip and everything, yes.
Slammed it down there. But I guess at this point, I would like to open it up. If we could unmute mics, and if somebody has questions they want to ask, Kevin, now's your chance.
Can I ask a question, please? Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Graham.
Did you, from the outset of writing the book, did you plan it to be a movie, or was that another step altogether?
Entirely.
So well.
It was entirely separate. I was thrilled that Jason Connery wanted to be part of the process. It was at least, it was going on 10 years after the book came out, before the film. And I remember at one time we were trying to round up financing, and the producer, Jim Kreutzer, brought Jason Connery and me to Chicago, and we were going to see a couple of very, very wealthy gentlemen in hopes that they would help finance the film. One of them, we go to his house, which is quite imposing, and he then took us out to show us the full-length par 3 hole in his backyard, which was a 5-iron, about a 175-yard, perfectly manicured par 3 in his backyard. And then we sat and tried to talk him into financing this film about the beginning of this great game. And Jason and I are going on about Tommy and how dramatic it is, the family. It's not just a golf film at all. It's about family drama and heartbreak and the love of a father and son and a man and his wife. And just when we reached the real apogee of our pitch, we realized that the man had fallen asleep. So he did not back the film. He afterward got in touch with me and told me I was wrong, that the first Open Championship happened in Prestwick. So we were lucky to find the right people to get behind the film. And I always felt that it ought to be a film, but that's true of so many things. I'm still waiting for the Titanic Thompson movie.
So Graham Ryan is actually the president of the Golf Society of Australia. For those of you that don't know him, I wanted to mention that. Also, we have a question from Mr. Davis, who is very important to. He's the publisher of The Golf, and now I can't get to it. Come on. Okay. Kevin, this is a bit off topic, but most of your several books cover themes that had some sentimental impact on our culture or an important juncture. If there is a common thread, it's that, like the story of the Morrises. These events are not well known. What led you to delve into the murder of Kitty Ghs?
That's what an interesting question. That is very much how I feel about these projects. I think you've got to feel awfully strongly about something to devote a year and a half or more of your life to it. And one thing that is absolutely a thread, it's utterly true of Tommy Morris and of Kitty Genovese. The Kitty Genovese, very briefly, was a notorious murder in New York City in 1964. It's the source of what was called the Apathy Narrative. The story was, and it was on the front page of the New York Times, that 38 of her neighbors looked out their windows while she was stabbed and killed, murdered in plain sight. And that was supposed to explain the apathy of modern America. And there was one witness, it was actually one witness who said, I didn't want to get involved. And that became the story of that. That's also the story behind my current book, which is going to come out in a month. And that's the one about the Challenger space shuttle. These are stories where I think people felt that they knew what had happened, but the truth was so much deeper and more interesting than what had been known before, that I found it utterly fascinating to spend one's time and find out as much as possible to tell the actual truth. That Tom and Tommy Morris were not stained glass figures who did nothing wrong, and that Kitty Genovese had been killed in a particular way that was a myth. And I think the same thing is true of the Space Shuttle Challenger accident, which last time I'm going to mention it, but we are familiar with it. I remember seeing it, but what really happened? What really happened is so much deeper and more interesting than the simple story, that it's worth devoting a good deal of one's life, a significant chunk of one's life, to such a project. That's how I feel anyway.
Okay,
and thank you for what a good
wrap up. We got time for a couple more questions.
Jim, I have two, if I might.
Go ahead, Ed.
First of all, what a great privilege, and thanks to both you, Jim, and Bern for putting this together, because it's so wonderful to have Kevin here and being able to talk about that wonderful book he put together. Kevin, I got a couple of questions. First of all, you mentioned Doc Malcolm, who's just, as you said, a wonderful, wonderful human being and a great guy. But did you get the opportunity to meet his co-author, Peter Crabtree?
I spoke to Peter on the phone a couple of times, and I know David prized his friendship, and so many of the beautifully photographed things in their book, those were from Peter Crabtree, but we never met in person.
Amazing human being. The other thing I wanted to just ask you is Roger McStravick. Did you ever get a chance to talk to Roger? And
we've traded emails, and I know his heart is in a similar place as far as trying to find out the truth of Tom and the history of the game there. I haven't spoken with Roger for a long time. I think we corresponded, and I am an admirer of some of his work as well.
Well, thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I had one thing I wanted to ask all of you that, and this goes back to the very beginning. I've always wondered about that 4 1/4 inches, which troubles me because if the hole were the size of a bucket, then golf would go faster, and I would be a halfway decent player. Whenever people say, "Oh, why is the hole the size it is?" the thing you always hear is it's the hole cutter at Musselburgh, and then they've still got it, and it's 4 1/4 inches. Absolutely true. My question is, why is the hole cutter, the famous relic hole cutter at Musselburgh, why is it 4 1/4 inches across? I believe, can't prove, that that's another thing that goes directly back to Tom Morris. In the olden days, when you would dig the hole you dig sand out of the bottom of the hole to make your tee, make your sand tee for the next hole. But if it rains, that hole is just going to collapse. Tom Morris invented the cup liner, and the first cup liners were made by the Kincaple Brick Works near St. Andrews, and they were 4 1/4 inches across. I didn't go to the Brickworks and do its history to try to establish that that's a fact, but that's what I believe. I think that tells even more than the fact that the Musselboro hole cutter happens to be that dimension.
One last thing, you might want to, if you want another murder mystery person, look up Marion Miley. She was a famous amateur golfer that just was killed at the country club with the bingo money. It's a fascinating story. Marion Miley.
How about that? I'll look up Marion.
Marion Miley. Beautiful woman.
So, James, do you have any more questions to ask of our guest, Mr. Cook?
I do not.
Okay, well, we're kind of going to wrap it up, but I wanted to point out that John Roos Boson is on the call too. And John is a local, the Greensburg, Latrobe area, and has been helping us out with planning for the GHS convention, which we're going to have in October. And we have several enhancements to the program. They're Arnold Palmer related. And if John wouldn't mind, he could maybe give us a little bit of a preview from the insider's perspective on what we're formulating for the convention. John, are you there? I have to see if he's muted.
And you might have to unmute his mic.
That's what I'm looking for now. He's still there. And there we go, I think. Now, can he do that, James?
Yeah, if he would have to unmute his mic now too.
All right, I asked him to do it. And
Okay.
if
He's on now.
Am I live?
all good. Hi, John.
You're live. Go ahead.
Hi, folks. How are you? You know, with the convention, we're really trying to get the idea of the Palmer culture to the folks from all over the country that come to the convention. And part of the focus, we're going to get folks that knew Arnie in a little more intimate manner, more away from the celebrity part, but as a person. So when we have the folks at Latrobe Country Club, it's almost like the history of golf, like talk about Tom Morris. When you go through the old Latrobe Country Club, you see so many personal things about Arnie and his life and his family. And we're going to have enough people there that you can hear firsthand from a lot of people, from his audiologist to his dentist, to folks who work closely with him, like myself. One of his best buddies in the world, Jim Rukowski Sr. from Erie. I think the experience is going to enhance everyone's opinion of Arnie as being a down-to-earth guy, a person that led by example. And even though he was world famous, he was a legend right in our own neighborhood. And the book that Bern's holding up, Arnold Palmer, Homespun Stories of the King, Chris Riddell, who wrote the book, did a lot of work for many magazines, and he was an interviewer for Kingdom magazine many times. If you ever read Kingdom magazine, and as well as I knew Arnie much better than Chris ever knew him, I would read Kingdom magazine after it came out, and I'd say, where did Chris get that information from Arnie? He felt so comfortable with Chris, he would open up just like our conversation here with all the great folks here. You just speak from the heart and things come out, like when you're looking at Tom Morris that you never would know influenced the rest of our lives, things he did many, many decades ago. So with the convention, I think it's going to be fun for everyone, especially those that like history and like to collect things and want to enhance their own lives with golf. When you hear the deep down things that Arnie was involved with and the people he touched, like myself, and you're talking either one-on-one or with a group, it's going to be quite rewarding for all of us, I think.
Very good. Well, thanks, John. We're actually planning 2 opportunities at the golf course at Latrobe. Afterwards, we're going to have a session, some hors d'oeuvres and some drinks and some stories. And I think those are going to be more the golf buddy stories from the locals from Latrobe and Greensburg area who knew Arnie when and well. And then Chris Riddell has volunteered to come back to the hotel on a different day. I believe it's going to be the Friday day, but that's not firm yet. And be able to be there in a room and a setting where the guests of the hotel and the convention can, interact with that author and hear more of those insider stories. So we're really looking forward to that. I'm likely to Zoom that call when Chris is there live. That'll be a lot of fun. We're likely to do a Zoom like we did from Columbus. It was popular. We didn't advertise it. But if we're able to Zoom from the trade show, it would be another opportunity to provide a service to our membership for people that can't travel for some reason or another. So there's a lot going on. Please visit the website. Please go to our social media. We've started to expand our Golf Heritage Society social media Facebook page. We've expanded it so that all the members can contribute. And we're hoping that that really catches on. And we're hoping that the subgroup develops, and we're going to really have a lot of fun hosting more and more meetings with people who are many miles apart. And a shout out to my buddy Graham Ryan, who's a publisher and on the other side of the world in Australia. It's always great that you participate. It really does talk about the global nature of the game of golf and how it brings us all together. So shout out to you, Graham.
It's a pleasure.
Hey, Bern.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. I'm sorry
Well,
I can't go to Pittsburgh this year.
So
I
Graham,
said, I'm sorry I can't make it to Pittsburgh.
well, you know what? We're going to bring Pittsburgh to you, my friend.
That's a very good idea.
We'll do what we can to share some of these things. All I need to do is pull out my phone and touch the Zoom button and tell you in advance, and we'll line that up for our friends who are down under, but
Yes.
close to our heart.
You have many. Good.
Very good.
Hey, Graham. Hey, Graham.
Yes.
Every year, Latrobe Country Club would have a little match against our sister club in Latrobe, Australia. We would
Yes.
play the same day and just match our scores. And one year, I was lucky enough to have the low net score and the low gross score that year.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Latrobe, there's a Latrobe Golf Club in Melbourne. And Latrobe, in fact, was an early explorer in Melbourne. There's a Latrobe Street in Melbourne. So he was a very significant figure in Melbourne's early history back in the 1840s, 1850s. But anyway.
Very good.
There is the golf course. Sure. Well, good luck with Pittsburgh. And that's a wonderful location. I have, in fact, been there. And when I worked in the steel industry. So that was a few years ago now.
You wouldn't
Go ahead,
recognize.
Bob.
We will be sending promotionals with some of the beauty of the city of Pittsburgh and some of the opportunities that people can do excursions. So those will be on our website. Those will be on our Facebook site. You'll see them from time to time. We're going to be meeting soon to talk about how we do all the promotionals. But it's going to be a good time, and we're going to try to share some aspects of it from people who cannot travel. So I want to thank everybody who took the time to come on. I especially want to thank Kevin Cook, both for being on tonight, but absolutely for the fantastic, extraordinary gift of the work of Tommy's Honor. It meant so much to me as I read it. When I visited some of the places and got to St. Andrews, it just really made it more and more special. So thank you, Kevin. We appreciate you being on tonight.
Thank you.
And
Kevin.
also,
Thank you, Vern.
thank
And
you.
thanks to James for being such a fine interlocutor.
There you go. That was my next comment, and he did a great job, I would say, and I'm sure everybody would agree. So thank you, one and all, and let's look for the listing of the next Zoom call and the schedule and calendar for our series of Zoom calls for our GHS membership. So thank you all, and good night. Take
Go
care.
buy Kevin's books.